Alright everybody, in this video we're going to be going over the grid method. The grid method is a type of drawing method that allows you to realistically recreate an image by applying evenly spaced squares on a reference photo as well as on your drawing surface, and then copying that image one square at a time so that it breaks the image down into digestible chunks.
Okay, so the first step to using the grid method is finding and preparing an image to be used. I found this image of a parrot, I right-clicked on it, and I went to Save Image As. I recommend you save your pictures to your picture folder. You can name it whatever you need to. And then you're going to open that image either by clicking on the download link or opening your File Explorer and then going to your Pictures folder. The first thing we need to do is crop this so that it's an even number when we're applying the grid. So I clicked on the crop button, and then it opens up this screen. What I'm going to do to make my life easy is going to go to the aspect ratio, and I'm going to click 10 by 8. Okay? What that does is it crops it to an even aspect ratio so that when we apply the grid to it, it will be an even amount of squares and not an odd. Okay? The next thing you might need to do, depending on the project you're doing, is go to Adjustments, and then if you're doing a pencil drawing, you're going to want this in black and white. So I'm going to go over to the color bar, and I'm going to drag it all the way to the left, and that will remove all of the color. I'm going to save a copy. You can also save over the original, but I'm going to save a copy. The next thing we're going to do is apply the grid to that picture. So you're going to go to the website, griddrawingtool.com. Type that up in the URL bar. When you do that, you should get to this website. This is the website we're going to use to apply the grid to our digital image. Step 1 is going to be to upload the image that you edited. Choose your file, and then locate it in the Pictures file. Okay? The next thing you need to do is skip all of these steps because we already did the adjusting, and go to Step 5, Grid. Okay? Now if you remember, we changed the aspect ratio to 8 by 10. So what that means is that we need to select the correct number of boxes wide. So this is going to depend on your image. If your image is portrait, meaning that it's taller than it is wide, you're going to click the shorter number. So it's 8 by 10. So it's going to be 8 squares across, and then I'm going to hit Apply Grid. Okay, so if you count, you should have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 across, and then you should have 10 on top. If your image is longer than it is tall, then you would change this to a 10 instead of an 8. Okay, you can change the way the grid looks, you can change the color, you can change how thick the grid is, and then you can hit Apply, and that will change how the grid looks on your image. The last thing you're going to do is you're going to click Download, and then you will have your reference photo with your grid prepared.
The next step in the grid method is going to be setting up the grid on the actual paper that you're going to be doing the drawing on. You're going to need a ruler that has inches on it. Everybody might have a different ruler, but you'll see that an inch is about the size of the first knuckle on your thumb. If you have a ruler that has centimeters and inches on it, centimeters are much smaller and shorter. They don't even reach the end of your fingernail, versus the inch is generally about that length from the knuckle to the end of your thumb. So I'm going to measure my paper just to make sure. So it's 10 inches long by 8 inches wide. So what we need to do to set up our grid is take our ruler, and then if you have a little bit of plastic before the line on the 0, it might be different for you. So when you put the ruler on the end of the paper, make sure that you put it on the 0 line and not the edge of the ruler. It depends on what type of ruler that you have. Some rulers start at the edge, some of them have a little bit of space between the edge and the 0. I'm going to line my ruler up with the top of my page, and I'm going to leave a little bit of a gap between the ruler and the top of the page. What I'm going to do is I'm going to make a small tick mark with my pencil going down the ruler at every whole number. So I'm not going to worry about any of these fraction lines on the inside. I'm just going to go 1, 2, 3, all the way down the ruler until I reach the end of the paper. Now, it's very important that you are as light as possible when doing this. The grid tool is meant to help you draw the image, but you should not see it in the final piece. Okay, what I'm going to do after that, after I have all my tick marks, I'm going to take the ruler and I'm going to bring it straight down. Okay, if you do what a lot of people do, which is they rotate the paper, then your lines will be crooked. Okay, so we want to make sure our lines stay as straight as possible. So after you've done your tick marks at the top of the paper, you're going to take your ruler down the paper to the edge of the paper, and you're going to do the exact same thing that you did at the top of the paper. Okay, so now I have two very faint tick marks, which you might not even be able to see on camera, on either side of this piece of paper. To draw the line across the paper, I'm going to take the straight edge of my ruler and I'm going to line the ruler up with the tick marks. So you want to make sure the marks are just above the ruler, not inside of the ruler. You want to line that up on both sides. Okay? Once you have your ruler lined up, you want to hold the ruler firmly with your hand. If you hold it with just one finger while you're drawing the line, the ruler is going to skid. Okay, and you don't want that ruler to move. You want to be precise. So you're going to line the ruler up with the tick marks, and you're going to hold it down with your thumb and your first two fingers or whatever's comfortable. You want to make sure the ruler's not going to move. You're going to take your pencil and hold it from the very end. Again, you want the grid to be as light as possible. So I'm going to drag that pencil ever so slightly across the ruler between those 2 points, and I'm going to get my first grid line. Now, you might not even be able to see it on camera because it's so light, but that's the point. You do not want to see the grid in the final product. You just want to use it to draw the photo. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go across and I'm going to do this for every single set of lines on either side of the paper until I reach the end of the paper. Then I can take my ruler in the middle of the paper now, and if I measure those sections, each section should be 1 inch wide. Now I'm going to go in the opposite direction. I'm going to do the same thing I did on the sides, and I'm going to do it on the top, or the thinnest part of the paper. And that is a completed grid on a piece of paper to start a drawing. Any one of these given squares, I should be able to take my ruler and line up the 0 line on the edge, and it should measure 1 inch on one side and then 1 inch on the other side. All of these have to be square in order for this to be successful. Precision is important when creating the grid, and then being as light as possible so that you can erase it before you start to shade.
All right, now for actually using the grid as a drawing tool. What you need to do is think of it in terms of one box at a time. Now you can arrange this however you want. You could number these, you could put letters down the sides, you could do something like that. And then you can either print out your photo or you can keep it up on your computer in front of you and then use that to refer to as you draw. I highly recommend that if you're right-handed, you work from left to right so that you don't smear it as you work. And then if you're left-handed, you work from the upper right down so that you don't smear it as you work. What I recommend is that you focus on that first square, and then you use your image and you focus just on the square. Don't focus on the rest of the image, because if you look at it and you think there's no way I could draw that, that's too hard, it's too complicated, that's what the grid tool is for. You will be shocked at how good your drawing will turn out if you use the grid tool correctly. So starting off with that very first square, I don't see anything. So most of that is going to be shading. I see a little faint line, so I'm going to draw that little faint line, but that's about it. Use the intersections of the grid to see the relationships between where certain things are. Let me show you what that means. So I'm going to go over one more square, and I can see the tip of this cat's ear.
So on my drawing, 1 square over, this is where the intersection is. I can see that the tip of the ear comes just about halfway up this square, and then it comes almost to the corner on that square right there. So looking at those relationships, so halfway up, and I'm just focusing on this square, nothing else, just that square. And then I'm gonna follow that ear down the grid, and I'm gonna keep going. I'm gonna follow that line. So the next square down is the side of that ear. It keeps going past the intersection and down into the next square. So just focusing on 1 square at a time. So I could go down this way, I could go across this way, but again, I would go left to right as best you can to avoid smearing. And then by the time you're done, you'd be surprised at what you're capable of just by breaking things down into digestible chunks. But I recommend starting with a basic outline first and then going back. And once you have that basic outline, you can very lightly erase the grid before you start to shade. Because if you shade over the grid and you start to do really dark shading, you will be able to see the grid through that. So do your outline first, then go back and very faintly erase your grid so that you can barely see it and it's almost not even there anymore. And then you can start to add shading, because then the foundational drawing is good and it's in place, and you can proceed on to shading after that.